Tonight, Israel's cabinet is meeting to ratify the first phase of the deal on Gaza, the final step before a ceasefire. Relief inside Israel, with the 20 remaining living hostages expected to be released at the start of next week. And joy inside Gaza too, as people there anticipate an end to military operations and the start of a surge of humanitarian aid. But despite the optimism, still many unanswered questions about the long-term future and governance of the Strip. Meanwhile, the Prime Minister on a trip to India expresses his profound relief at the deal and piles the praise on Donald Trump. So does a president who provokes outrage and division in his own country now deserve a Nobel Peace Prize that he's openly campaigned for? We'll be getting in-depth analysis of what happens next from our panel, Jasmine El Gamal and Sir William Patey. They'll be with us for the next hour. It's Thursday. I'm Darren McCaffrey, live from Westminster, and this is the Politics Hub. A very good evening to you on this Thursday. I'm going to begin with the very latest developments in the Middle East tonight as the Gaza ceasefire deal thrashed out last night begins the process of being implemented. This evening, Donald Trump said that the remaining Israeli hostages will be released on Monday or Tuesday next week, and that he himself is expected to go to the region for a formal ceremony marking the agreement. At the same time, Benjamin Netanyahu's cabinet have been meeting tonight to ratify the deal. A sensation in Israeli military operations is expected to follow shortly. Well, let's go tonight to Jerusalem and get the very latest with our Middle East correspondent, Adam Parsons, who's live for us there. And Adam, this meeting of the Israeli cabinet is continuing.
Yes, it is. It started late. It was supposed to start at 5 o'clock here in Jerusalem, and it was delayed for 90 minutes. We think that is because of ongoing consultations about the identity of Palestinian prisoners who are going to be released as part of a deal. There's going to be 250 high-profile Palestinian prisoners, along with 1,700 other detainees, who will be released in return for the 48 hostages, of whom we think 20 are still alive and 28 who've died. Now, those exchanges we thought were going to happen on Sunday. It now looks more likely it's going to be Monday or Tuesday. And one of the reasons is this long process that is now in place by the Israeli government. So they have the meetings tonight where they will inevitably agree to this deal, even if a couple of the far-right members of the cabinet, Itamar Ben-Gvir and Bezalel Smotrich, oppose this deal. It will still get through. The opposition will back that. There then has to be 24 hours in which people, particularly families of the victims of crimes that were judged to have been carried out by the people who are being released, are allowed to appeal against it. They can effectively put in a court appeal saying that person shouldn't be released, and have that heard. Very, very unlikely that the courts are going to change this process, but that will take 24 hours. So that takes us into tomorrow, Friday evening, and then there's a 72-hour window, a ceasefire, and in that window, Hamas will get the hostages together. It says that it can't do that until the ceasefire is actually in place. And it will get together the hostages. To be honest, I'm not sure whether at the moment they know where they all are, because not all of these hostages are held by Hamas, and it's not clear whether they know where all the remains of the dead hostages are. But in those 3 days, they will gather those together, and then on Monday or Tuesday, there will be the process, and it is an intricate, logistically demanding process of those people being put together. That Hamas presenting them, then handing them over to the Red Cross, and the Red Cross taking those people to the Israeli military. They'll then be taken to hospitals. Previous occasion, the hospitals in Tel Aviv. Obviously, a lot more people. My anticipation is that they won't all be done in one day. Let's say it could be Monday for the living hostages and Tuesday for the return of those who have died. So that's the process, Darren. The political fallout will continue. We'll wait and see whether Smotrich and Ben-Gvir oppose this deal. Almost certainly Smotrich will. I think Ben-Gvir quite possibly will. And also we're looking at whether or not and when mediators start to broach the more protracted, difficult, chronic problems about the future of Gaza, about who will run the Gaza Strip. Palestinians desperately don't want it to be an international body, including Tony Blair, about when and how far the Israeli military will pull out, about the status of Hamas, and about to what extent Hamas will disarm. And we are going to get into the weeds of what exactly the word disarm means, for instance. But right now, I think this region is so weary of war. The Gaza war has been so devastating. Every day for 2 years, an average of 90 people have been killed in Gaza. There are so many in Gaza, in Israel, the Middle East, in the wider world, who will just be pleased for a respite from the killing.
Yeah, and Adam, as you're speaking there, we're actually just getting some news in from the Reuters news agency from the Gaza Hamas chief saying that they declare an end to the war today and the start of a permanent ceasefire. We're talking about the kind of choreography of this deal being implemented, if you like, the different cogs moving. Also hearing as well that the agreement, according to Hamas, includes the opening of the Rafah crossing in both directions, that the agreement will see the release by Israel of all jailed Palestinian women and children, but also saying that Hamas has received guarantees from US administration that the war has ended completely. So we are starting to see, at least formally it seems on the Hamas side, that they are publicly committing to this and some of the details of the deal from as they see it, if you like.
Yeah, I assume this is Khalil El-Khaya, who, although Hamas doesn't at the moment have a official leader, he is considered the de facto leader. And I think it is worth saying that Hamas have been offering ceasefires for really quite a long time now. For months, they've offered to sign up to a ceasefire proposal, which initially was returning half of the hostages, and that one, Benjamin Netanyahu, just completely refused to even countenance. So this one now, where they have offered to return all of the hostages all in one go, I think there is an acceptance that in order to have done that, to have given up all of their negotiating leverage, they must have been given assurances by Arab states and probably by the United States that Israel would not be allowed simply to take these hostages, wait a bit, and then resume military activity. Notable, incidentally, by the way, that Donald Trump in his last few references has stopped referring to Hamas as Hamas, the terror organization or the terror group, and has simply called them Hamas. On such small things, of course, the politicians ride their careers. And so, yes, it would appear that there is a much, much greater level of understanding between the mediators, but specifically the United States and Hamas in terms of what they want. Now, it's the opening of the Rafah crossing, that will be necessary, of course, to bring in the huge amounts of aid that have been promised to Gaza. In terms of people going the other way, well, let's wait and see. Exactly. The Egyptians, to be blunt, are not going to allow a huge wave of Gazans to flee Gaza and come into Egypt. So I think we have to take that with a pinch of salt and see what guarantees are given there. And in terms of this, well, it's the end of the war. Well, it is, but it's a ceasefire. And there are many in Gaza and in the rest of, well, certainly in the West Bank, who believe and are cynical about this, who believe that Israel is getting its hostages back, but is still has at least some members of its government who would like to return to Gaza, who would like to annex that territory. They look at the West Bank and say, well, look at the way the settlements are being expanded there. Look at the way the Israeli government is providing succor to settlers. So there are lots of people, and frankly, it's the same emotion, whether you are families of hostages or whether you are Gazans, who are saying, I'll believe it when it happens, that peace is good for the moment, but let's see what the long term holds.
OK, Adam, we appreciate that live for us there in Jerusalem. Adam Parsons, and we'll be back to Adam later in the programme if there's any news from the Israeli side there in Jerusalem. Well, let's bring in now our panel for this evening. That is Jasmine El-Gamal, political analyst and former Middle East advisor at the US Department of Defence, and William Patey, former British ambassador to Saudi Arabia, Iraq and Afghanistan. A very good evening to you both on what is a momentous day. And Jasmine, let's start with you if I can and step back a little bit about what's happened in the last 24 hours. This is a very significant moment, isn't it? What's your assessment of it?
I mean, it is a significant moment in that this is something that people have been waiting for 2 years now. An end to this war, an end to the suffering, the death, the destruction, and a movement towards a different future. It's not so different in the sense that a lot of the same issues that have been sticking points in previous ceasefires still remain. A lot of the really complicated issues, Hamas's disarmament, how is it going to happen, when, whether it's going to be over phases, whether it's ever going to really happen. On the Israeli side, whether this particular Israeli government is actually ever going to agree to a permanent end to the war and to a pathway towards a Palestinian state. I mean, those are things that the government has said will never happen under their watch. So, yes, this is really good news, and I don't want to take that joy and celebration away from people who really deserve it. But I do want to urge real caution in getting ahead of ourselves, because the real work actually begins after the ceasefire deal is signed, after the first phase is implemented, and then the second phase and those big issues start to be discussed.
And I suppose that's the point, isn't it, Sir William, that we kind of have been here before, if you like.
Well, I don't think we've been quite at this point. We've had false hopes of ceasefires and agreements, one side agreeing, the other not agreeing. What we've got, when we should get tonight, when the Israeli cabinet agree, they've agreed to the first phase of the agreement. And what's not clear is what's in the first phase, and that's an interesting statement by Hamas. I think they're trying to set the agenda for what the first phase is, because obviously the release of all the hostages in the first phase, the stopping of the war, a ceasefire in the first phase, although Hamas has portrayed that as an end to the war. I don't think that's how Smotrich and Ben-Gvir see it. And we're talking about unrestricted aid into Gaza. But the Israelis have particular views on what unrestricted means. I mean, through all this conflict, the Israelis have been claiming that aid has been unrestricted, which we know not to be true. So there's quite a lot of spoilers in there, but I don't want to detract from the importance of this moment. The guns becoming silent, the bombs stop falling on Palestinian civilians, aid getting in, the families of the Israelis, hostages who've been traumatized, the beginning of healing process in Israel, that's all extremely important. But we've already had people like Ben-Gvir and Smotrich and even Netanyahu reject parts of the agreement. I mean, the agreement includes a pathway to self-determination for the Palestinians. That's
where it's going to get complicated.
Yeah, that's when it's going to get really complicated.
Yeah. And we're just hearing that actually the security cabinet meeting in Jerusalem in Israel has ended, but they're now meeting on the general government kind of cabinet level to discuss all of this. And Jasmine, I mean, you know, I grew up in Northern Ireland in the 1990s, another conflict that lots of people thought would never be concluded, and thankfully it kind of has been. But at the heart of that, and this kind of leads and bleeds into kind of the different phases of this, was trust. And it's something that is very clearly not evident in this process. Yes, there can be deals done on certain issues, but there is a distinct lack of trust on both sides.
Yeah, I'm so glad you mentioned that, because it is such an important point. There is, of course, an absolute lack of trust. There's fear and trauma on both sides that is existential. What October 7th meant to Israelis, to many Jews around the world, and what is now being described by most international human rights experts and a UN report and the International Association of Genocide Scholars as a genocide for Palestinians. So it's not just that there's no trust, there's also a level of deep existential trauma where you are now fighting for your life and you can't even afford to trust, even if you want to. That's where the mediators come in. That's where the mediating role comes in. That's where security guarantees come in. And it's important to note that while Hamas has said that the only reason they agreed to this was because they are choosing to trust Donald Trump, basically, we have seen question marks over his trustworthiness over the last few months in the region, whether when it comes to Iran or whether when it comes to Qatar and Lebanon, where Donald Trump's word hasn't always meant safety for people living in the region. So you're going to have people really choosing to trust him, choosing to say, okay, well, he really seems to want this now. He's putting the pressure on Netanyahu. We're going to go with it. We're going to trust him. But there's a real fear that his word doesn't stand as it has not stood before.
And the other point here, kind of leading on from that, is kind of the longevity of this and Donald Trump's ability to constantly remain potentially engaged with this process, because we know in the past that he can kind of slightly give up on things if it gets a little bit tough further down the line. And that's going to be, and by the way, it's not just for the United States, you should say, for lots of other actors and mediators in this, it is that this is a process that could take quite a long time.
That's why it will be important to get to the second phase of this, the international stabilisation force that the Arabs have backed, because there's a lot of elements here. Trust but verify. So you want to get the international stabilisation force in there, verifying that the Israelis have withdrawn to whatever line is agreed, and then they will try and have a buffer zone, and the Arabs will want that line to be back to what the recognised borders of Gaza was. You'll get more and more people. The aid is to be delivered by the UN and Red Cross and independent agencies. So you'll have more people in Gaza that will be able to verify what's going on. There's a big role for the Arab governments. I think Donald Trump has put his reputation on the line here. So I think he's got Netanyahu.
He needs this to succeed.
He needs the cessation. He needs this to go somewhere. He's committed to a 20-point plan, even if the elements of the Israeli government haven't committed to the whole plan. So he wants a peace prize. He won't get it this Friday. He won't get it this time. But if he pulls this off and the 20-point plan is introduced and there is a long-term ceasefire and there's a self-determination process for the Palestinians, he'll deserve a Nobel Peace Prize.
We're going to come on to that a little later. For the moment, Jasmine and William, thank you very much indeed, because we're now going to get a report from our international correspondent, Alex Rossi, who's been looking at the extraordinary events that have led up to and included the last 24 hours.
They had dreamed of this day, hoped for it, but even now, many can hardly believe it has finally come. In Hostages Square, where families and supporters gathered to plead for an end to the war and the safe return of the captives, there's now music, dancing, and tears of joy. For Danny Moran, whose son Omri was kidnapped from Kibbutz Nahal Oz, it is a moment of overwhelming relief.
I feel a heavenly sense of joy and overwhelmed with emotion. There's no greater joy than this. It's been like waiting 9 months for a baby in pregnancy, and instead, I've been waiting for my child for 2 years. I feel ecstatic.
But for other families who are waiting for the return of the bodies of their loved ones, it is a time of subdued celebration, joy tempered by grief and the weight of loss.
My father was there for 4 months alive, and that we failed to bring him for his release. And that if we're going to get lucky, so to speak, which is a crazy thing, lucky to get his remains and kind of bury him. That's what I'm expecting from me personally. Okay, the best outcome for me is to actually get something to bury.
After 3 days of negotiations, the breakthrough was announced by Donald Trump, first on social media, then in the White House, keen to show off the power of his diplomacy.
Last night we reached a momentous breakthrough in the Middle East, something that people said was never going to be done. The whole world has come together for this. People that didn't get along, people that didn't like each other, neighboring countries that frankly didn't like each other, but now it's just this moment in time.
This has been a turbulent few days. The talks in Egypt were tense at first, but eventually common ground was found and an agreement was reached. The Gaza Strip has been pounded for the last 2 years. The suffering of the population has been immense. The deal will also see huge amounts of aid flooding the enclave. But the sense of loss in this shattered place is staggering.
They are saying there is a ceasefire now. After what? After our beloved families and relatives died? What do we have left in the Gaza Strip? It's a wreck. There is no suitable housing, not even for dogs.
And even after the agreement was announced, the fighting continued. Israeli tanks seen firing on Gaza's main coastal roads. The ceasefire is not expected to begin until Friday evening. This long war has caused extensive damage. It's hard to think how this place can be rebuilt. By evening, Israel's Prime Minister convened his security cabinet to discuss the new deal in the face of opposition from far-right ministers. The truth is that Benjamin Netanyahu had no choice but to go along with the deal. It was pushed through by the force of one man, the US president. And here he's being feted as the hero of the hour.
The celebrations here in Hostages Square have been going on for hours and will likely go on late into the night. But this is only the first phase of the Trump plan. Much could still go wrong if a more lasting peace is to be achieved. The question now is, will it hold and will it progress?
The Trump plan lays out a vision for a comprehensive peace. The first step, a ceasefire in Gaza and the release of hostages. But despite the euphoria here, the next steps will be even more difficult. Alex Rossi, Sky News, Tel Aviv.
Well, meanwhile, our Prime Minister, Sir Keir Starmer, has been continuing his trip to India today, trumpeting collaboration on higher education between the two countries. But inevitably, this was eclipsed by that Gaza ceasefire deal. And this was the Prime Minister's reaction.
I want to strongly welcome the news that a deal has been reached on the first stage of President Trump's peace plan for Gaza. This will come as a profound relief for the hostages and their families and the civilian population in Gaza, and for the whole world. And we will now work with our partners to ensure that this deal is implemented in full and without delay.
Well, our Deputy Political Editor, Sam Coates, has been travelling with the Prime Minister to India, and he sent us this update.
Keir Starmer speaking there at the closing press conference after a two-day whirlwind trip to Mumbai in India, of course overshadowed by what's going on in the Middle East and in Washington. He said he felt profound relief that the peace deal had been struck. But listen to some of the nuances. He said that he wanted the promises to be upheld and the prisoners to be released. I think they're realistic in Downing Street, that this is a staging post, a really important one, but a staging post that doesn't automatically completely guarantee success. So there are nerves about what happens over the coming hours and days. One specific, I asked the Prime Minister about one of his predecessors and their role potentially in what happens in Gaza. Listen to how he does and doesn't answer that question.
Prime Minister, it looks like Tony Blair's going to have quite a big role overseeing Gaza. Should we trust his instincts on that?
The first and most important thing to say is that the deal today is a real breakthrough. That is why it's important that we recognise that and recognise the human impact that is going to have on those that have been most affected. And that's why I've referenced, in particular, the hostages, their families, and all civilians in Gaza who have been through unimaginable horrors and grief over the last period of this conflict. Now it does need to be implemented. I'm less interested, to be perfectly frank, in discussions about personnel than I am in getting it implemented. The UK has played an important part behind the scenes in relation to these negotiations, working with the US and mediators, and we stand ready to play our part in implementing this, again, with others as we go forward. For me, what matters is the substance of what happens next. and that is what we're totally focused on.
So I'm told that the British government does back Tony Blair taking a role in Gaza. The Arab states have backed it. Donald Trump put it forward. So curious, that formulation of words there. More generally, at the conclusion of this two-day trip, Keir Starmer keen to press the idea that he will have brought tens of thousands of jobs back to the UK because of the deals done with the 126 business figures and others on the trip who've been accompanying with him. He will hope that voters notice what he thinks are big successes like that.
There you go, that was Sam Coates in India. We were talking about earlier one of the complications potentially around this deal. We're just hearing in the last couple of minutes from Israel's National Security Minister, Ben Gvir, saying that he would bring down Netanyahu's government if Hamas is not dismantled. And we know that security cabinet meeting has ended, but there is now just a general Israeli cabinet minister meeting happening. But clearly Ben Gvir at least concerns, not necessarily about the first phase of this deal, but maybe further down the track, suggesting that he would bring down Netanyahu's government if Hamas is not dismantled. And we'll keep bringing you these news lines as they emerge from Israel throughout the evening here on Sky News. A little earlier, though, I also had a chance to speak to Emily Thornberry, who, of course, is the chair of the Foreign Affairs Select Committee here in Britain. And this is my interview with her. What's your reaction to today's deal?
I'm completely delighted. I'm totally delighted. We have had 2 years of absolute misery of these poor hostages held underground for all this time and their grieving, frantic families. Thousands upon thousands of innocent civilians being killed in Gaza. It's just been appalling to watch it. So I'm so grateful. I'm so pleased that we finally have a ceasefire, that aid is going to go into Gaza unhindered, that the UN will be handing it out, that the hostages will come home and that killing is going to stop.
Well, we have been here before, though, and that's part of the problem, isn't it, in the sense of there is a lack of trust on either side. I mean, there is no guarantee that this is going to hold, that, even if phase one works, that we'll ever get beyond that.
Yeah, so there's a difference between a ceasefire, which is the great relief at the moment, and a lasting peace. And so the first thing that has to be said is that credit goes to Donald Trump for bringing the ceasefire, because it wouldn't have happened without him, because Netanyahu has stopped listening to everyone apart from Donald Trump, and Donald Trump made it perfectly clear there had to be a ceasefire. And so all credit to Donald Trump. But he needs to remain engaged, because this is not peace. This is only a ceasefire. A peace will only come when there's a political solution. And that needs a great deal of detailed work. It is going to be very hard. This is the difficult bit now. And what we need is for Donald Trump. He doesn't have to be involved in all the details. There are other countries, there are other people of goodwill who will work together. And we've seen the international community working behind the scenes in a way we've never really seen them before, being so effective at putting things together. And they will be able to continue to do so and put forward a peace plan. And then we need to have Donald Trump to come behind it and use his strength to ensure that it actually happens.
There'll be a lot of people, though, who won't like this deal, here in the UK as well as in Israel, and we've heard some of even the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's colleagues essentially say they're not going to vote for it. They're unhappy about the fact that there are Palestinian prisoners, many convicted of life sentences for murder, who are going to be released, and concerns about the future governance of Gaza.
Well, I mean, everything's a compromise. No one's going to get everything that they want. That's politics. But I believe in politics. And I believe that politics can find an answer to this. And we need to be able to pull together, and we need to be able to start building trust with one another and know that what matters more than anything else, is that we get lasting peace in the Middle East. I mean, just that very sentence seems to be something which everybody always has thought has been a fantasy. There's no way that we can get peace in the Middle East. Well, nobody thought we could get peace in Northern Ireland, but we did. Yeah,
but you talked about trust. Trust is very important there. I mean, can the Palestinians, can the people of Gaza trust the Israeli Prime Minister?
I think that it doesn't have to be one particular individual, but I think that, if you get a a community of nations working together and putting together a peace plan that different people buy into, then trust can be developed. So yes, I can understand why people might not trust Netanyahu. There are plenty of people who Netanyahu might not trust. I mean, I fully understand that people in Israel don't trust Hamas. Hamas has no future when it comes to Gaza. Everybody knows that. You know,
you say that, but the whole point is if we're going to have an independent Palestinian state, surely it's then up to the Palestinians who runs Palestine. Everyone keeps saying, well, Hamas is clearly not going to have a part to play in this, but isn't the whole point of being an independent sovereign state is that you get to decide who runs that state?
Yes, and there is a time lag between, and we're not talking about this happening tomorrow. We're talking about there needing to be an interim provisions, but we need to make sure those interim provisions are going in the right direction so that what we're ending up with is an independent Palestinian state, of course, where people make decisions about who it is that governs them. But it has to be done in a way which is peaceful. We have to make sure that it is that the Palestinian state is disarmed. I mean, that's, I think, is something which also people kind of have to come to terms with. And Israel needs to be safe as well.
Just on the governance in the interim term, what's your feeling about someone like Tony Blair, for example, having a part to play in all of this?
I'm completely relaxed about whoever it is. I don't really care. What matters for me is what works. You know, so if Tony Blair, for example, has the trust of all parties, then fine. And he has a role and he wants to do it, and it's felt that he has a positive role to play, then fine, yes, good. You know, or anyone else, I really don't mind. All I care about is that we don't have Hamas involved. You know, they have no future in Gaza, and we make sure that we're heading towards two states and we're heading towards peace.
Okay, just on our role in all of this, what's very clear is that the British government, Europe even, have had very little say in all this. We've been not even players, we've been merely observers. A real sign, isn't it, of kind of Britain's almost impotence on the world stage.
Where do you get that from?
Well, I mean, sorry, what has the UK done to bring about this deal?
So you should have been listening, right? So when the President Trump came to Britain and there was the summit there, if you'd listened, you know, the Prime Minister said, we have a team that's working with the American team on peace.
You've also
in the
just
Middle
suggested
East.
that Benjamin Netanyahu only listens to Donald Trump.
Yes, yes.
Britain has had no, I would say...
we didn't, absolutely, Britain has not been, we've not been able to get the ear of Netanyahu, but we have had the ear of Donald Trump. And Donald Trump's attitude to the Middle East has markedly changed over the last few months because he has had sensible friends.
Okay, Emily Thornby, thank you very much.
Not at all.
Well, a lot to pick up on there with Jasmine and William. Before we do, though, on the Emily Thornby stuff, Jasmine, let's just reflect on Ben-Gvir and others. I mean, we have to remember that there is a very wide variation of opinion inside Israel, by the way, about this entire war and indeed this potential deal.
Of course. I mean, Ben-Gvir and Smotrich, as you know, represent the most extreme far-right space in Israeli society, where it's not even about what a deal looks like, it's about having a deal at all. They just don't want any kind of deal. They have spoken openly and often about their plans and their dreams to reestablish settlements in Gaza, to take over the West Bank. They don't even believe in anything called the West Bank. They have a vision, an expansionist vision of greater Israel.
But they are players in this process in the sense that they could bring down the government.
Well, Yair Lapid, who's a member of the opposition, has offered Netanyahu a safety net. He said that if the other two ministers or one of them threatens to walk out, that Lapid is happy to step in and prevent that government from falling. I also think it's important. I don't hear a lot of people talking about the fact that before Ben-Gvir became a minister, he was a convicted terrorist in Israel. He doesn't have a political future without Netanyahu and without this government. So I don't think Netanyahu has as little leverage with Ben-Gvir as people make it out to seem. I think he just doesn't want to push back against that because part of him believes in not having a Palestinian state. He's bragged about it before, that he's been the only prime minister to prevent one consistently, and that he stated so. And so I think this is a marriage of convenience for all of them. So I wouldn't just put it all on Ben-Gvir.
So, William, let's pick up on the point that I was trying to make to Emily Thornby there. That she very much disagreed with about, and she had a point maybe, with the influence of Donald Trump about Britain's part, or has it had a part, essentially, in where we've ended up over influence with the Israeli government or any part of this process. It doesn't seem very clear from the outside.
Well, we have to be realistic. I mean, Britain is no longer the power it was when we carved up the Middle East with the French in the Sykes-Picot Agreement or the Balfour Declaration. Times have moved on. And there's no other power comparable to the United States and Donald Trump in that regard. But we have been working with the French, with the Saudis and the Egyptians, with Arab states, to create the underpinning of a plan which Donald Trump has now endorsed and put forward. This plan has been in the making, and British diplomacy has played a part in constructing that plan, the International Stabilisation Force and the reconstruction, and getting Donald Trump to buy into it. So let's not exaggerate our influence, but let's not underestimate it either. And I think it's going to be very important going forward. I think Jasmine is absolutely right. When we talk, you see Ben-Gvir, he's basically getting his excuses in early for trying to disrupt the agreement. They don't believe in a two-state solution any more than Hamas does. So when we talk about excluding Hamas because they're extremists and because they don't believe in a two-state solution, we have to begin to think about elements of the Israeli government who are in the same boat. And I don't think it's a disaster if the Netanyahu government fell and there was to be an election. There has to be an election by next October anyway. So there's going to be an Israeli election. A slightly different result.
OK, for the time being, again, thank you very much indeed. And we will be speaking to the Israeli ambassador to the UN a little later in the programme, in the next 10 minutes or so. Now, phase one of Donald Trump's peace plan may be set to be implemented, but it's just an initial step on what will be, as we've been talking about, a fragile, longer-term settlement with many hurdles in between. And our Middle East correspondent, Adam Parsons, has been looking at those hurdles.
In Gaza, there is delight at this ceasefire, but it is a joy that's tempered by the stark, grim facts. 67,000 people have been killed here over the past 2 years. The bombs have destroyed homes, towns, and trust. Nobody dares to believe that peace will be permanent. In Gaza, many believe Israel still harbours hopes of annexing this land. Ahed Fairwana is a well-known political analyst. He's lived through this war and has been displaced from his home. Fairwana told us the peace plan was vague, but that he hoped it would thwart any plans Israel had to return.
Hamas has previously said it is willing to give up its weapons for a Palestinian state. But Trump's plan proposes international oversight instead, and that creates ambiguity. Still, if there is substantial internal and external pressure, I think an agreement is likely, amid denying Israel any pretext to continue justifying its aggression in Gaza.
Smoke still rises over Gaza. The fighting has not yet stopped. But this is how things might change. At the moment, Gazans have been told to head towards a so-called humanitarian zone to stay safe. Under the plan, the IDF would withdraw behind this yellow line, but they would still control half the territory. The Trump plan also calls for an international body to run Gaza in the future, and for many that is unacceptable, an overhang of colonial instincts.
The board of peace will need to have more than just two figureheads from the West. This isn't 1919 anymore. And it's got to have credible figures from the region and from the Palestinian community as well, in order to make future governance of Gaza much more likely as an issue of self-determination. It cannot be seen as something being imposed by those from the West again.
Please, order in the hall.
Israel's global reputation has been battered. Witness the walkout at the United Nations before Benjamin Netanyahu's speech. Even its closest relationships have been strained. So how has the Middle East been changed by the past 2 years of war?
I think, if anything, the region now is certainly far less safer than it has been in the last few decades. And that includes Israel and Israelis themselves. Israel has been so emboldened enough to admit that it is looking to expand its borders and has continued aggressions, has continued violations, has continued to rescind its various agreements with different states in the region.
This deal is not perfect. It's not a long-term comprehensive solution to the region's problems, but it does offer respite, optimism and breathing space. And after 2 years of harrowing war, that's something many will cherish. Adam Parsons, Sky News, Jerusalem.
Well, that story is going to feature in tomorrow's papers, of course, and we'll have our extended press preview from 10:30 this evening with tonight's news and tomorrow's headlines. Joining us tonight will be the Deputy Editor from Conservative Home, that is Henry Hill, and the Associate Editor, Political Editor for The New Statesman, Rachel Cunliffe. Do stay tuned for that at 10:30 tonight. Let's bring back in Jasmine and Sir William, who are with me in the studio. And Sir William, let's pick up on the governance of Gaza. Feels like a long time ago since that video that Donald Trump posted, you remember, of kind of making it this kind of, Riviera of high-rise buildings and fountains and all that sort of stuff. But maybe, are we that far away from that? What is the governance going to look like? Even in the short term, this idea about Tony Blair and Donald Trump sitting on a board that's going to oversee some type of administration.
Yeah, well, I don't think we can expect the Board of Peace to be all that engaged in the detail. I think they'll be, even if Tony Blair is. And remember, Tony Blair spent quite a long time, many years, as the Quartet envoy. So since he left the Prime Ministership, he spent a lot of time talking to the various players. He knows
many of them will know him quite well.
Know him. So he will. They'll have strong opinions about them, some positive, some negative. But I think what the plan talks about is having a Palestinian technocratic government. So you'll be Palestinians running the government, running the authorities, getting the water running again, getting the electricity running again, supervising the construction. And you'll have this international stabilisation force, which presumably will have to include policemen and troops from Egypt and Jordan. They're maintaining law and order and security, and at the same time contributing to building up a Palestinian security force, which will eventually lead to the Israelis drawing not just in the humanitarian zone, but withdrawing to the borders of Gaza. So this is not a process for next week or next month. This is years in the making. And as we've seen, there are plenty spoilers. You've got Smotrich already saying, unless Hamas is dismantled, the agreement will disappear. Now, for all this to happen, the agreement says Hamas has to either give up their arms, accept an amnesty, or leave the territory. So I don't think they've agreed to do that in the first phase, but they're going to have to do it eventually, and it's going to be a different set of Palestinians who are going to be running Gaza.
And Jasmine, on that point, that's the really interesting and possibly one of the most difficult points about this, about what happens to Hamas. I mean, everyone seems to say, well, it's pretty clear that Hamas have got no future in the administration of Gaza, but getting there is going to be a lot easier than just saying that.
Yes. Look, I think you've mentioned this, Sir William, the future of Gaza, the future of Palestine is going to be decided by Palestinians. And they are going to have to decide what role Hamas, whether it's as an organization or as members or as former members, have in that future state. But what I will say is that it's impossible to talk about the future of Hamas or any other organization, non-state organization that professes to be a resistance organization. It's impossible to talk about it without also talking about the reason why that organization exists, which is the occupation. So when we're talking about long-term solutions here, we're talking about the establishment of a Palestinian state, which means the end of an occupation that has led to the rise of organizations like Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad and others, as well as nonviolent resistance. So I just think it's important to couple those two things as we talk about the future.
Well, we're going to talk about the future now as well with the Israeli ambassador to the United Nations. That's Danny Danon, who is live for us in New York this evening. Danny, thank you very much indeed for joining us here on Sky News. I suppose my first question to you is that there must be great relief where you are and indeed in Israel tonight that the hostages could be returning home as early as Monday or Tuesday of next week, according to the US president.
Absolutely. We are very hopeful. For 2 years, we prayed, we fought in order to bring them back. We paid a very heavy price. More than 2,000 people died since October 7th. And we pray that they will all come home safely. So there's a lot of tension, with the families. We don't know exactly the condition of the hostages. We don't know exactly, from those who are not alive anymore, who will be able to come back, the families to receive the bodies. So we will have to wait, but we are hopeful. We are hopeful. We waited for that day, and we put a lot of pressure and determination it requires from us in order to get to this point where we can actually speak about the closure of this war.
In saying that, obviously it is a compromise, but many within your own government are not happy about that compromise, talking about the release of prisoners, the release by Israel of prisoners, saying that essentially this will release the next generation of terrorist leaders who will do everything to continue to pour rivers of Jewish blood here. That's the Israeli finance minister. Do you agree with him?
Well, I think it's painful. It's not a perfect agreement. We are paying a very heavy price. Overwhelming support of the government will be there in a few hours, supporting this agreement, and the public in Israel will also support it. But, we have to look at the numbers and at the people that we are releasing. Those are convicted terrorists who killed dozens of Jews, and we know that they will not become, peace activists. They will go back to do what they did for the entire life.
Precisely, isn't that the point that some within your government suggest this is short-sighted, is the quote, and surely are you not concerned about that?
Well, we have two bad options, either to leave the hostages behind or to release those murderers. And I think the government will decide to release the murderers and to bring the hostages home. We're talking about civilians who were kidnapped from their homes. And the duty of the government is to protect its citizens. And unfortunately, it didn't happen on October 7th. That's why we engaged in this war to bring them back home. And we paid a price, and we are paying a heavier price now. But I think that is the decision the government will take, because we cannot leave them behind and just tell them, we are not willing to pay that price.
Just in terms of timings. Okay, sorry, Dan. Just in terms of timings, I mean, you seem to suggest this will be ratified this evening, that there's overwhelming support. Effectively, if it is, when does this ceasefire begin? Is it immediate?
So according to the first phase that will be approved in the government, the Israeli military will move to a different line. And after that will happen, then we should expect the release of the hostages, and it will take 72 hours. So I think first, we will have 24 hours to push the troops backward. It will happen, and then we will see the release of hostages coming to Israel. Probably it will be only Sunday or Monday.
Okay, clearly, if this deal is to succeed in the short, medium, and certainly the long term, there's going to have to be some trust with the Palestinian Authority and the people who live in the West Bank and Gaza. Do you trust them?
Well, I think now they have an option to choose, They have to choose, a peaceful society. We left Gaza 20 years ago in 2005, and we basically gave them the keys and told them, build your future. You have the responsibility over Gaza, and the Hamas and the radicals took over Gaza. I don't think today it will happen so fast, but that will be the challenge. And we also expect from the international community to take the proper steps to try and change the culture of hate among the Palestinians. Enough with the indoctrination of the young students.
Is that in part
paying
also
salary to terrorists?
But Danny, in part, if that trust goes, it works both ways. What does Israel need to do to build up trust? I mean, trust works both ways.
Well, I think the fact that we are pulling out and we have no desire to stay in Gaza speaks for itself. It's up for the Palestinians to build their own future, to take responsibility, to have a leadership that promotes peace. That's the challenge for them. And, in terms of security, we will not take any risks. We will watch very carefully what's happening there. We will not allow Hamas to regroup, rearm, and to pose a threat against us again. But I think the challenge is to see that if you have a genuine leadership that will come and say, enough with the incitement and the hate. Let's try to build something for ourselves.
But trust would come from a very explicit commitment by the Israeli government to a Palestinian state, wouldn't it? To a two-state solution. That would help.
That's not on the table. It's not part of the agreement. And I think before we speak about any future agreements, now they have to speak about how they conduct their affairs, to prove to themselves, first of all, that they can actually govern without allowing radicals to take over. When you look at the Middle East, Darren, you see that you have countries that the radicals control, and you have countries that can actually govern. I think now the test is what will happen in Gaza. Would it become like Yemen or Libya, you know, a place where you have chaos? Or it will be a place that they can actually speak about law and order? We don't know the answer yet.
Just finally on all of this, you know, this is Donald Trump's doing, isn't it? This is his essential deal. He's kind of had to drag Benjamin Netanyahu to get here. The people in Hostage Square tonight are praising Donald Trump, not your Prime Minister.
Well, first, we are grateful for Donald Trump and his administration for their involvement, and we have to thank Prime Minister Netanyahu. But first of all, we have to thank our soldiers who fought for 2 years and put the pressure on Hamas and brought them to the place where they accepted the terms of the deals. And when you look at the government decision 2 years ago, very basic. We made a commitment to bring the hostages back and to ensure that Hamas will not stay in power. So according to the deal, if it will work through, we will achieve those goals of the war. So we give credit to everyone.
But praise for everyone, but let's be honest about this. Many within Israel, many outside of Israel, and it seems that even Donald Trump himself thinks that Benjamin Netanyahu has been an obstacle to try and bring about any deal. I think it was reported that he said he was being way too negative.
I don't accept it. You know, the fact that the Prime Minister is bringing the agreement to the government as we speak, and it's going to be voted and supported by the government and by the people of Israel, it speaks for itself. But we fought very hard to get to this point. It wouldn't have happened immediately. We had to put the pressure on Hamas, and I think the determination of the Prime Minister to actually take Gaza City, and we intended to do it, that brought Hamas to a conclusion that it's better to negotiate now before we enter Gaza City than after.
OK, Danny Badenoch, the Israeli ambassador to the UN, thank you very much indeed. Joining us live from New York. Let's bring back in Jasmine and William, who are with me in the studio. And there was a lot of head shaking, I think it's fair to say, during that interview. So, William.
Well, as a former diplomat, I realise that diplomats sometimes have to be disingenuous, but that really takes the biscuit. You know, the idea that somehow the Israelis pulled out in 2005 and left Gaza to be governed and become a democratic state. They did everything they could to prevent the Palestinian Authority from exercising authority in Gaza. They were collaborating with Hamas for quite a long time to maintain a sort of Hamas level of administration that denied the Palestinians the ability to group together. And Danny Danan comes from a settler movement, which at the moment is driving Palestinians off their land. There's the idea that Israel is acting as an honest broker here, and if only the Palestinians would, govern themselves in a proper way, life would be sweet and easy. I mean, it's just, it's almost. I have to contain myself.
I can tell you're slightly. Jasmine, just briefly on this before we move on, because I do also want to talk about Donald Trump briefly.
I echo everything that Sir William said. I was going to say that myself if he hadn't. I would maybe just add, and we've both worked in the region, for years and have lived in the region. People are a product of their circumstances. The idea that you can say these people are hateful, these people are radical, they were just born that way, and we have to fix them, and then we'll have peace, is really, it's disingenuous, and it's certainly not true. The way to move forward is to start to address root causes of this conflict, to start to address real traumas and real pain, and find a way for these two peoples to live side by side in a way where both can prosper and live freely and exercise their rights to self-determination. Otherwise, you're going to have the same problems over and over again, and it's not because one society is hateful or the other is sick.
I do want to move on, if I can, to talk about Donald Trump. because, you know, he's a man we've mentioned a lot tonight. There's been praise from people you would never expect to have seen praise from on this, maybe even from you two as well. What's your sense of his role in all of this, and this idea about, which he clearly is very, very keen on, almost desperate for, this kind of Nobel Prize, Peace Prize?
Well, I mean, a lot of people have been working on him, and Jared Kushner, and I think Tony Blair attended a meeting with Jared Kushner some weeks ago in the White House. So, you know, whatever you think of Tony Blair, he was clearly influencing Donald Trump. I think Keir Starmer has a role in that, and Arab governments all had a role together. And I think they've given Donald Trump a sort of plan that has credibility, not as a comprehensive solution, but as a new beginning and a new start. And he seems to have bought into it, and he seems to have, you saw in the press conference with Benjamin Netanyahu how uncomfortable Netanyahu was in that press conference. So it's his plan, he backs it. If it succeeds, if it gets us on a path to a peace in the Middle East and a two-state solution, few people will have earned a Nobel Peace Prize more than Donald Trump, if he sticks to it, if he sticks to the plan and keeps the pressure. But there's a load of obstacles
given the fact, I think Barack Obama received it within the first year, having done nothing, and the EU won it as well. I mean, you know, the bar necessarily isn't terribly high, I'd say. But just your thoughts, Jasmine, on Donald Trump, the peacemaker, because he does talk about this a lot.
He does, and he came into office saying, I'm going to end wars in the Middle East, I'm going to end the war between Russia and Ukraine. You know, Donald Trump is someone who, in some ways, is very simple. He wants to be liked, he wants to win, he wants to do things no one has been able to do before. So all of those things are good things when it comes to peacemaking. It means that, you know, we have a chance. But
maybe he's prepared to be a bit bolder and radical than when others might be a bit more...
Sure, absolutely. I mean, you know, as an American, it's hard for me to separate Trump, the peacemaker abroad, with Trump, the autocrat at home. You know, that's both of those are Donald Trump right now. But I will go back to maybe just to come full circle to what I said at the very beginning, which is that this is a ceasefire. This is a ceasefire and a return of hostages, an exchange of prisoners and hostages. That's all it is right now. So I hope that it will become much more than that. I hope that there's a pathway to peace and a Palestinian state. And in that case, let's nominate him for a peace prize. But let's not get ahead of ourselves.
It's a long way to go. Sir William, Jasmine, thank you very much indeed, both for joining us this evening. It's been quite a programme, lots of in-depth discussion about really complex issues. We really, really appreciate your time. Thank you very much indeed. And speaking of Donald Trump, we're going to hear from Donald Trump in the next hour or so. He is currently meeting with a European leader, and we'll bring you that meeting and indeed the words of the US President afterwards here on Sky, as well as continuing coverage of the developments from Israel. That's it on Politics Hub for tonight. I'm back, of course, on Monday at 7. Do join me then if you can. Up next, it is the UK.
I witnessed the complete destruction of a place linked to my childhood memories.
This is insane.
I'm Yusra Al-Bagher, Sky's Africa correspondent based in Johannesburg, South Africa. I felt awe when we saw the mountain gorillas in Rwanda.
We call him the king of the jungle. This is the alpha silverback.
Sky News. Get the full story first.